welcome Mr. Łukasz Warzecha, journalist and political commentator. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time because these matters are quite complex, especially for our international viewers. And our correspondent Agata Dura, she covered quite a few of those investigative committees. So perhaps we could begin with just an overview in terms of what it is that the current government is trying to do by putting such a strong focus on these investigations right now, because there are a number of pressing issues that need to be taken care of in the country. But there appears to be a very strong focus on these investigations. Perhaps you could give us a little insight as to why this is the case right now.
Well, the answer depends, of course, on who you support, because many answers today in Polish politics depend on who you support. In this argument or fight, I would say, between those two big political camps. And one answer would be an answer given by the current ruling government and current ruling camp would be that it is necessary to carry out investigations concerning the obvious issues, obvious criminal law breaking of the previous government. But a reply which would supposedly be given by today's opposition would be that because this government just doesn't deliver what it has promised to its electorate, it has to focus on such issues to give people something to be concerned with, to be focused on instead of some other more important things.
But I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, and perhaps I'll pretend just to put myself outside the situation. But from the point of view of perhaps someone who's not so involved in domestic politics, it seems as though a huge amount of resources, both in terms of manpower and just actual resources, are going into these investigations when there are so many pressing domestic issues that should be addressed. Perhaps you could comment on that as to why that is the case, because there are a number of things, perhaps the 100 promises that weren't fulfilled and weren't addressed, and there's a lot of time that is being put into these investigations.
Well, I think that we just should not throw all the investigative committees into one bag, because they concern different things. And on some issues, it is definitely, in my opinion, worth giving some time and resources to them. On some issues, it is not. And here we heard about two issues which, in my opinion, perhaps would not be so worth giving resources to them, because they have already been investigated by the Supreme Audit Chamber. And in my opinion, what the Supreme Audit Chamber has concluded in its reports was just enough. It is not necessary, in my opinion, to organize special investigative committees in the parliament on those issues. Those two issues that were reported by your reporter. Mm-hmm. So first, presidential elections that were supposed to be done by mail, and second, the visa problem, although the visa problem is more general, in my opinion. And if we suppose that such an investigative committee might come to some more general systemic conclusions, perhaps it is worth organizing such an investigation in the parliament, because those special investigative committees in the Polish parliament, their role in general should be to come to some general conclusions, systemic conclusions that could help ameliorate the system, mend the system, fix what is wrong in the system, not necessarily just focus on particular people or particular events. Will it be like that? We'll see.
Right. That's actually a fantastic point that you raised, because as I've been observing Polish domestic politics for some time now, I see a lot of emphasis is always placed on looking back and pointing fingers that he did this, she did that, instead of looking forward. I think voters by and large, want a government that's going to look forward and try and fix the situation and so that it's better. But maybe that's just me. Your impressions, is it harmful to have that emphasis on looking back? And in this government's, with all these investigations going on, does it not set a precedent that the next time a government changes, the first thing that the government's going to look to is try to find the previous government criminally liable for something?
Of course. And your point is very good, because we have two cases, as I said, two different cases. First case is the elections that were supposed to be conducted by mail, and this was just one-time event. So it is quite difficult to come to any general and systemic conclusion. The second case is the visa problem. And in the visa problem, you might come to general conclusions because you have the immigration problem. You have the problem of how to systematically select people that you want to come to Poland, that you want to be given visa to. So as far as the second investigative committee is concerned, yes, it might play a good role. As far as the previous one is concerned, the one about the presidential elections, in my opinion, it is more of a political theater.
And perhaps a more practical question in regards to the committees themselves. Could you tell us a little bit as to how these committees are put together? I understand that they are voted in, but in terms of the credentials of the people who actually make the committees themselves and then subsequently draw conclusions out of the evidence that is collated, can you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, first of all, we have a special act concerning parliamentary investigative committees. The members of the committees are elected by members of the parliament, so of course they are parliamentarians, and they want to have something for themselves. If they sit on such a committee, they usually try to make as good impression as possible and to, well, their careers are supposed to profit from sitting on such a committee. The results being mixed, of course. But it is always, and it has always been, a kind of political theater, which is also quite obvious. But apart from that political theater, in various cases, we had either investigative committees that could not really draw any general conclusions, so were quite useless, and investigative committees that could draw some general conclusions. But this was a minority. I think we had about, in the history of our parliament, since that act was voted through, the act about investigative committees, I think there were something like 10 investigative committees, perhaps, or perhaps 12, I should count, but not more. And some of them now are quite forgotten. Because they dealt with such complex issues that even for the public opinion, it was impossible to follow them. Like, for example, a committee which dealt with the VAT tax. VAT tax is such a complex issue that it was just not possible to understand what the members of the committee talked about. So I think most Poles have already forgotten that we indeed did have such a committee.
Indeed.
Well, Łukasz Warzecha, journalist and political commentator, thank you very much for shedding light on this, on these domestic issues here in Poland. We appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your invitation.